Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Biblical Bookworm. My name is Elizabeth, and today I'll be talking about the book The Heart of Perfection, which was published in 2019 by Colleen Carroll Campbell, who is the mother of 4 children, an award-winning author, print and broadcast journalist, and former presidential speechwriter. I read this book because Father Mike Schmitz recommended it, and it's about the author's personal experience with perfectionism and how she found ways to free herself from it. First, the author defines perfectionism. She writes that at the beginning she didn't think of herself as perfectionist, although she had been called an overachiever. A friend once told her that she wasn't sure if there was room for perfectionism in any other part of life, but she knew for sure that there was no room for it in motherhood. Around that time, Colleen Carroll Campbell realized that she struggled with perfectionism, which became especially clear to her through a particular incident with one of her children, which she describes in the book. She then defines perfectionism. You don't have to be a congenital perfectionist like me to have a problem with perfectionism, nor must you demand flawlessness in every part of your life. Perfectionism is simply an addiction to control and refusal to accept imperfection in some human endeavor. Looking at our culture today, I'd say a whole lot of folks suffer from that. She further explains that our demand for perfection can be seen in behavior like helicopter parenting, workaholics, exercise addiction, eating disorders, escalating levels of anxiety and depression, credit debt, and the demand for cosmetic surgery. And she writes that even if you don't identify with anything from that list, she is sure that there is at least one area in your life where your concern for success or control is greater than it should be. She explains how in devout Christian circles, people compete over who has the most faithful children, or who has the most children, or who has given up most for their children. And this spiritual perfectionism is the most dangerous type of perfectionism, as it's often mistaken for a virtue. The rest of the book is about famous saints who, according to the author, were recovering perfectionists. She also writes about one heretic as an example where not recovering from perfectionism can lead. And finally, she also dedicated one chapter to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, where she describes what she learned from meditating on it. The saints whose life she analyzes are Saint Francis de Sales, Saint Alphonsus Liguori, Saint Ignatius of Loyola, Saint Benedict, Saint Francis of Assisi, and also a little bit Saint Therese of Lisieux. And the one heretic is Angélique Arnauld. She writes that she initially thought that the Bible and the doctors of the Church encouraged her perfectionism, as, for example, Saint Teresa of Avila's and Saint Alphonsus Liguori's most popular books contain the word perfection. For example, Great Means of Salvation and Perfection by Saint Alphonsus Liguori and The Way of Perfection by Saint Teresa of Avila. Or also in Matthew 5:48, it says, "Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect." So she explains that there is nothing bad about the word perfection, but that the goal is not perfectionism, but Christian perfection, which are diametrically opposed. She explains that perfectionism is making yourself an idol, and depending on the circumstances, can be sinful. She later realized that the books she earlier thought encouraged her perfectionism now describe ways to overcome it. Those saints didn't use the word perfectionism in their books, but rather talked about overcoming scruples, combating pride, and exchanging their plans for God's plan. What is important to point out is that she doesn't encourage mediocrity, but rather advocates for finding the sweet spot between spiritual perfectionism and spiritual laziness. Now let's get to the lessons she learned from the saints regarding perfectionism. The first saint she talks about is Saint Francis de Sales, who taught her about gentleness. She realized that in order to be able to be gentle to others, you have to be gentle to yourself first, as by accepting your own limits and realizing your own weakness, we have more patience with others and are more willing to forgive them. Saint Francis de Sales also taught her that the best penances and sacrifices are the ones that choose us, not the ones we choose. So, for example, it's a greater mortification to eat whatever you're served than to choose what you're going to eat and what you're going to abstain from, as this latter behavior can be a form of pride. As far as I remember, St. Francis teaches that in the book Introduction to the Devout Life, about which I've made my very first video. She also mentions a beautiful quote by St. Francis: "Nothing is so strong as gentleness, and nothing so gentle as real strength." And to be honest, the more I think about it, the more truth I discover in it. I mean, if you think about it, real strength isn't violence or something that is measured in Newton, but to be gentle to others requires real strength because it's pretty hard to do. Another thing I really liked was a story Colleen Carroll Campbell tells when she talks about a family who made it a habit to talk at the dinner table about a mistake each person made that day and what they learned from it, instead of, for example, bragging about their achievements. And that helped them to combat perfectionism and also taught the kids that life's greatest lessons often come through our failures and mistakes. And in my opinion, if that's too radical for some people, I see also great value in going to confession regularly as a family. You know, when your kids start going to confession, because I think that even if you don't disclose what exactly you did wrong, it still shows the kids that their parents make mistakes. And I mean, imagine the opposite. Imagine that your 7-year-old child never sees you going to confession while it sees you going to communion every Sunday. That can't be good for the spiritual development. The author also writes at another point that it's a sign of maturity to not be scandalized and to find explanation in charity. So for example, if someone hurts you with their words, it would be a sign of maturity to find another reason for that behavior other than malevolence. Or as Jordan Peterson says it, always assume stupidity before malevolence. Another saint she analyzes is St. Alphonsus Liguori, who suffered from extreme scrupulosity, and here she mentions certain rules the spiritual director of St. Alphonsus made for him to help him with his scrupulosity. Those rules are: no repeating daily prayers you've already said, even if you said them distractedly; no skipping communion because you had a sexually explicit dream; no traipsing across town in bad weather or bad health to get to the Eucharistic exposition; just pray before the tabernacle in the nearest church on those days; no more confessing past sins or allowing scruples to disrupt your duties. With those rules and the help of his spiritual director, love gradually replaced fear as the driving force in St. Alphonsus' faith life. And later he even wrote a book on moral theology, which is the only one priests are told to follow without hesitation. St. Alphonsus said that he would rather be punished for overindulging than excessive rigor. Which makes sense. I mean, imagine being punished in hell for having punished yourself too much. Then Colleen Carroll Campbell touches upon St. Ignatius of Loyola. He also had scruples, and what worked for him was when he decided to never confess past sins again, and that made his inner peace return. He also realized that not every consolation comes from God, as the devil doesn't care if he speaks truth or falsehood as long as he gets the better of us. And in Loyola's case, he always had great spiritual inspirations when he was supposed to go to sleep. And as he realized that when he chose to pray instead of sleeping, the sleep deprivation hindered him from fulfilling his duties during the day, so he chose to ignore those inspirations and go to sleep. What the author learned from St. Benedict was how to find a work-life balance and about the importance of accepting limits. She writes that success according to the saints, like St. Benedict, is union with God, and while external achievements can't signal progress in that direction, a better marker is our willingness to accept limits of those achievements. Nowadays, we're told that if you believe you can achieve it, which is wrong, as we are finite creatures with limited power and partial knowledge. She also says that accepting her limits requires her to trust God more, which in turn fosters more trust in God, and that if she discovers that she can't do something as perfectly as planned, or that she can't do it at all, she usually observes that God has other ways to get things done. Colleen Carroll Campbell also sees an opportunity for an act of obedience in situations where we run out of time to finish a task. And in her final chapter, she writes about what meditating on the Sacred Heart of Jesus taught her, which is mainly to be vulnerable. A beautiful thought from the book is that Jesus' wounds are visible even after the resurrection, and so it makes little sense to hide or deny ours. She says that Jesus seems to say that to be perfect means to love others even if they hurt you. Now let's get to my opinion on the book. I would give the book a 9 out of 10 because it contains very many quotes from scripture, which I really liked, and even multiple passages when she's trying to say one thing, which is excellent. And I also learned a lot of things about the saints, and her personal stories, especially as a mother, were also really interesting and well told, in my opinion. One thing I didn't like about the book was I felt like her definition of perfectionism was too broad. I felt like the saints she diagnosed with perfectionism were a bit stretched, you know? It didn't fit exactly. I'm not sure if everyone who has scruples is a perfectionist. And I would also see a difference between perfectionism and striving for excellence. I mean, you can discuss that in the comments. I would be interested if you see a difference here. But I would say that someone who is striving for perfection is striving for an unattainable goal, and someone who is striving for excellence is striving for the highest attainable goal. And so the difference is that I think those problems have to be treated slightly differently. And for example, one thing that I found pretty interesting and helpful with striving for excellence is to not compare yourself with others, but to compare yourself with who you've been yesterday, because I feel like that's a more healthy approach. But I of course think that many of her tips also apply to people who are striving for excellence, to learn to accept your limits and to not be upset if you fail occasionally or if you can't finish a task. That's been it for today. I hope you liked the video. See you next week. God bless and bye!